You said you had my back, but instead you attacked. You got me out of my head. It won't go unsolved this time. We'll catch you and your crimes will be shining the light.
Welcome to Cold Case MHS Monsters and Demons, where real education meets real life. I'm your host, Randy Hubbard, and I thank you for listening. So if you've been listening to our podcast over the 3 seasons that we've been doing this, you know that I've had some pretty steady co-hosts along the way, and then every once in a while I'll throw a new one in on you. This one is a pretty special one to me because he's my colleague, and we've been working a long time on forensic stuff, and he's now hopefully going to take over for me in the cold case realm, and he's been a big part of helping us get this thing started, and that is Mr. Paul Berry, and I'm going to let him introduce himself about this and what he wants to do with this.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Randy. Like Randy said, I'm honored to be here. I think it's a great thing that these kids are doing, and Mr. Hubbard's laid the foundation for this cold case class. I know it wasn't easy getting this set up, allowing kids to really have a great experiential learning, but just that he's laid the foundation for this, and this podcast now has 11,000 listeners, which is pretty impressive for something that started from scratch 3 years ago. And just to keep in mind, and I think this is always important, is the purpose of this is for the victims and for the victims' families. A lot of times when you hear things and they talk about serial killers and all these shows that are on Netflix and stuff, all the focus is on the bad guy, whereas I think that we need to kind of flip the script a little bit and put the importance of who is the important people in here. And obviously, the bad guys are because you want to catch them, but then once you catch them, or if you don't know who they are, the focus needs to go on the people that are important, the victims, who had no say in this, and who were put in the wrong place at the wrong time, or something bad. They're where they live, their socioeconomic level, their neighborhood, their upbringing, all that stuff. And it's just, I think it's a really big deal. And hopefully one of these days, at one of these cases, somebody out there hearing this will say, yeah, I know something about that, and we can put some closure and help a family out that's had a horrific thing happen to them.
Well, and I appreciate you joining me, and thanks for all that you've done along the way. And let's get started with the show.
Sounds good.
My name is Lydia.
And I'm Lindsay. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the tragic murder of 5-year-old Devan Duniver, who vanished from her home in New Philadelphia, Ohio, on June 27, 1998.
Unfortunately, all the recent media coverage about this case has shifted to Anthony Harris, the boy who was arrested for Devan's murder.
So in our forensics classes, and you and I were talking about how unfortunate it is that the killer often gets more attention than the victim. And we talk about that with Ted Bundy and those kind of things. What do you think about this particular case?
Well, yeah, we were talking about how most people in society can tell you who John Wayne Gacy is and Ted Bundy and the BTK killer, but people probably can't name the victims, and that's the thing that's important in these types of situations is who are the victims, because they're the ones that are the important ones in these cases. I think this one's a little bit different, however, because the victim was a 5-year-old girl, and the initial suspect was also a kid. So I think that plays a role in this. It's a little bit different than the other situations just because of the age of the victim, and more importantly, probably because of the age of the suspect.
And the fact that he was later found wrongly accused of the crime.
Right. I mean, you can't imagine being a 12-year-old being accused of murder and you didn't do it. I mean, anybody being accused of murder that didn't commit the homicide, let alone a little kid. That has to affect him forever.
Oh, absolutely.
Even now, this was 1998, so he's in his 30s now, late 30s, and it's probably still something that's with him.
Our goal with this podcast is to get the story back out about Devan.
In order to understand everything that happens in this case, we want to start by speaking about who Devan was in her upbringing. Devan was born on October 19, 1992 in Guernsey County, Ohio, which is in the southeastern part of Ohio. Devan was the youngest of 2 children to Richard Duniver and Lori Valentine, then Duniver. She has an older brother named Dylan, who is 3 years older than her.
When Devan was 2 years old, Richard and Lori separated on March 23, 1995. Reacher later remarried and filed for a new marriage license with Carol Jean Bucher on September 5, 1997. At the time of her death, Devan and Dylan had at least 3 half-siblings and 3 step-siblings. According to our research, Devan was the youngest out of all of these children.
So again, when you look at victims, you have to look kind of at their background, their victimology is what we call it. Unfortunately, with Devan, she's so young, there's really not much of victimology. The really thing you have to look at is her family background. And in this case, she's the youngest of a really big family, but it's a family of multiple parts. And sometimes, the younger ones don't have the same attention that the older ones had.
Yeah, and I speaking from experience, being the youngest of 3 kids, my parents were, probably a lot stricter and hands-on with my older 2 sisters than they were me, just because, the more kids you go through that you have, it's not as easy to pay attention to and in this case they have 8. And then I think the other thing, what you were mentioning when you talk about victimology in this instance, her being so young, you just look at the entire family dynamics. Was this did the kid go outside and play a lot? Was Devan always outside? In that instance, if that's the case, then people walking by, people in the area, they see the kids outside a lot versus a kid that's outside with other kids. Did she play outside alone, or was she always have her siblings with her? Those are the kind of things that you look at to try to figure out, where a situation would be, someone would be able to, take advantage of that type of situation.
Yeah, and I think sometimes parents, when they get involved in either having to get ready to go somewhere or putting dinner on the table or something like that, sometimes often lose their kids for a little while.
Especially in a situation where you have 8, and I'm sure the father, the mother, and the other siblings. There are probably times where they count on the older siblings to watch the younger siblings, and maybe the mother thought the father was watching her at that time. So it's kind of like it gets lost in the sauce a little bit as far as who's watching the kid, and somebody thinks somebody's watching them, but they're really not, and then that whole dynamic plays a role too.
Right, exactly.
Devan was an independent and bright young girl who loved to play outside. Devan was looking forward to participating in gymnastics in the coming fall and wanted to be a ballerina when she grew up. Devan was looking forward to starting kindergarten in the fall, and every night Lori and Devan would read Dr. Seuss's 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish. Devan has been quoted to be a happy and spoiled little girl.
Now, Dylan, Devan's older brother, at the time of Devan's murder was 8 years old. Like Devan, Dylan had many activities planned for the fall, such as baseball. Now, Dylan was an unusual young child. While researching, we found out that apparently Dylan killed small animals, which is indicative of a psychopathic mindset. He was also claimed to be, by his school's principal, the student most likely to commit this crime.
The first thing when I hear that, the striking thing to me is the fact that the principal would say that without any evidence or as far as evidence, as far as doing that. Sure, we're around kids as teachers, all the time, but to just, blanketly say that kind of a statement about how old was the kid that
was probably 8? Yeah.
Yeah, to say that, is just kind of a, that's a far-reaching statement. I do, we've talked about in forensics and stuff, the characteristics that all serial killers have in common as far as torturing animals, bedwetting, and setting fires, I believe, is the third one.
Right.
That not every kid that does that's going to grow up to be a psychopath or a serial killer. Sometimes, kids are just they're inquisitive and they do things that seen by adults as inappropriate, but for a kid's mind, it's a little bit different. It's just interesting that the principal would say that about an 8-year-old.
Right. Unless there's something we don't know about. Unless
Right.
there were reports on him, he's been in trouble at school. Maybe he's threatened people. Because
Right.
back then it was a little bit different than now.
Yeah, based on that information, you'd say that's unusual behavior for sure for someone to engage in. Kids 8 to just make a blanket statement that feels like he was the one that did it without any kind of other evidence. Just
Right.
is a little far stretched.
Right. And I think the other biggest thing in there is that just because you mentioned it earlier, they do weird stuff like that when they're kids. We've all done stupid stuff when we're kids and then realize that was dumb. Doesn't necessarily mean that he's a psychopath or he's going to grow up to be a psychopath. And here's the other thing. Not all psychopaths are killers.
Right.
So that's the thing that we have to be careful with.
And not all killers are psychopaths.
Exactly.
Now, Lori Valentine was a single mother. She worked in HR in the Cambridge area. After her and Richard Duniver split, Lori, Devin, and Dylan lived in New Philadelphia. When Lori moved into the area, they didn't have any friends. Her closest friend was Cynthia Harris, the next-door neighbor and mother of Anthony Harris, who, as we've said, was convicted for the murder of Devin. After Devin's murder and the following trial, Lori and Dylan moved back to Guernsey County.
Devin's father, Richard, lived in Cambridge, Ohio, which is around a 40-minute drive from New Philadelphia, where Lori lived with the children. We are unaware of what custody agreement was decided, but Devin and Dylan appear to have had a good relationship with both of their parents. As we stated earlier, Richard was remarried at the time of Devin's death. When looking into the family, we have found that Richard has been married to or had children with at least 8 women. We are in no way judging him, we just think it is important to note that this was not the first relationship he had that resulted in separation.
While we were searching social media to try to reach out to the siblings, it appeared that the siblings are close and have a relationship with their father.
Now we want to talk about New Philadelphia itself. New Philadelphia was known to be a small, quiet town where, quote, nothing like this ever happened. In an interview, Lori said that her cousin had told her that New Philadelphia was the best place to raise children. They had good schools, good community, and good people. But tragedy struck this small town on June 27th, 1998.
Early that morning, Devin and Dylan had just come home after spending a week with their father in Cambridge, Ohio.
According to Anthony Harris's appeal timeline, which is important to note because times fluctuate depending on where you look, Devin and Dylan went outside of the apartment complex that they lived in to play. This was a common occurrence for the Duniver siblings, as they would try to play with their friends that lived in the complex as well. This was in the 90s, and unlike today, so many children would be playing outside all the time, not necessarily with parents looking over their every move.
Now, at around 1:30, Lori told Devin to stay inside the house as she was leaving for the grocery store. However, Devin went outside anyways to go play with a different neighbor in the building next door, Dale Rusger's daughter.
About 20 minutes later, at 1:50 p.m., Lori Valentine comes back downstairs from getting ready and realizes that Devin is missing. She sees Dylan and asks where Devin went, where he responds that she went outside. Lori goes outside and realizes that she does not see Devin anywhere. Lori begins to search for Devin. Devin reportedly had the tendency to wander off, so Lori went to Devin's friend's house to see if Devin tried to go play there. When we were looking at the course it would take to get to that house, it seemed unlikely that this would happen because it is a long way for a 5-year-old to go. Ultimately, the family was on vacation, so no one was there.
At 2 p.m., Lori sees Anthony Harris in the woods on his way home. She offers him $5 to have him help her look for Devin. At around 5:20 p.m., after about 3 hours of searching, Anthony goes home.
Almost 7 hours since she last saw Devin, Lori calls the New Philadelphia Police Department to report Devin missing at around 8:11 p.m. We are not trying to point fingers, we just believe that it is strange to wait 7 hours to call the police for your missing 5-year-old. The first 48 hours are the most valuable time to locate someone, especially a child. This 7 hours in between when she initially last saw Devin and when she called the police and 2 people searching, it would have been able to have covered more ground if the police had been contacted.
So it does seem a little strange that she waited 7 hours to call the police. I will say that maybe that's not necessarily too weird in the fact that she's out looking for her daughter, she's worried about her, thought she could find her because she's normally probably at a friend's house, things like that. And I also think that sometimes parents back then thought they had to be gone for a certain amount of time, which was not true, but TV shows and things like that kind of made it sound like that.
I'd be interested, was it 7 hours from the last time she saw her, or was it 7 hours from when she knew she was missing? Because to me, that kind of makes a bit of a difference, because, I think about my own kids. If my kid's is 5 and I'm looking for him and I'm looking for an hour, 2 hours, and then you got to go back to the victimology aspect of it and say, is her just going off to friends something that she did? If it is, then it makes a little bit more sense. Like, if this has happened in the past and they found her at a neighbor's house playing with the dog in the backyard or something, or is this a one-off and it's never happened before? I mean, I just know personally, and everybody's different, but if I'm looking for my you got to think 5 years old.
Right.
It's not like they're 12, 15.
Right.
You know, a 5-year-old really can't fend for themselves, or hardly at all. That is a little bit strange, but, you know, I do understand your point, too, as far as that 24-hour window, but I don't know. I mean, 7 hours that's a long time.
It seems like a long time, very long time. Now, she also had other kids, so I don't know how she was handling that situation.
But I mean, a phone call.
Yeah, a phone call is not that difficult.
Because you call the police and they say, "Well, you got to wait 24 hours," and now you know.
Right.
I mean, that's we don't, like you said, we don't know what's going on in that situation, and the franticness of it, and the time might have just slipped away, you know. So there's a lot of things that could factor into that.
Now, after Lori contacts the police, they put out a radio call to have searchers come in from all over the New Philadelphia area to help look Devin. Because this is a radio call, it is impossible to track exactly who was in the search party, and we just know that there were many people there to help look. And the weather that night that they were looking for Devin was between 70 and 80 degrees, so it was fairly warm. There was also a storm earlier that night, which caused the ground to be wet, and as well as having debris all over the place.
When we were looking for ways that I could have been able to help locate Devin and what happened between the time that she went missing and the time that her body was ultimately found, we came across search dogs being used. These dogs were not from the police department but voluntarily used to help find Devin. The first dog arrived around 10 p.m. on June 27th. This dog went to a neighbor's house where Devin was confirmed to have gone, returned to the apartment, and then took an elaborate pathway to the side entry door of a house near the garage. There was a second dog that went out around 2 a.m. and followed the exact same pathway as the first. Depending on the speed at which you walked, this walk could take around 45 minutes. When looking to see who this house belonged to, we found that the house adjacent to this house belonged to a convicted child molester who had recently been released from prison. Even though it was confirmed to the neighbor's house that the dogs went to the location that Devin had been that day, it seems as if the dogs were not believed after they went on the elaborate pathway that they took. This lead has seemed to have never been followed. We believe that they did initial questioning of the person that owned the house adjacent, but we don't know what happened since.
Yeah, I kind of find it interesting that they wouldn't have done any more investigation on the house the dogs went to with the convicted child molester. Just, you know, for the mere fact of we do victimology to figure out, how the victim acts and things like that. You think you would take, the past historical data of somebody who's a possible suspect into account too, and, maybe put a little bit more time and resources into investigating that. And as far as the path taking 45 minutes, I mean, if she was gone for 7 hours, there could have been some wandering, there could have been some walking around. If the dogs lost the trail and picked it up again, possibly that the Devin got in a vehicle. Those are all things that are possible, but perhaps if we don't have the information, maybe the person whose house that the police went to, maybe they had a solid alibi, like maybe they weren't there. If we don't have that information, we don't want to make judgments on that based on, information that we don't have.
And the thing about the dogs is that they weren't actually police dogs. They were retired police dogs, I think, possibly even cadaver dogs. They had been retired, and once a dog retires and they don't practice that a lot, sometimes they're not considered to be solid at their job. So
is the thought there too, the fact that the dogs didn't find the victim when they were in the woods? Is the thought that maybe that she wasn't in the woods yet? Is that so? Then the dog. That's why so she was maybe at a house or somewhere else when the dogs were looking, and then was placed in the woods later.
Right, and there's some evidence to kind of prove that possibly she was killed somewhere else and then moved to that spot. So that's why they think the dogs didn't go into that area, because they brought the body back later.
Now, in this 7-hour time span, when from the time she was noticed missing to the time the police were called, were the dogs in that, or were the dogs after that?
They were after that. They were part of the search team.
So then how, from that 7-hour time when she was missing, when was she found?
That is a good question. I want to say she was found the next day, because there was a storm that came that night.
Okay.
They found her the next day, like at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay.
So there's a pretty long time there. Plus the rain may have affected the scent and things like that too.
So this was from start to finish was less than 24 hours.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Our only question is that if Devan's body had been in the woods all night, how would the dogs have not picked up the scent there? This leads us to believe that the reason Devan's body had not been found that night when they were searching was because she was not in the woods, but possibly in that house.
Now, at around 2:30 p.m. on June 28, 1998, Devan's body was found by an off-duty EMT officer. This area that it was found was claimed to be previously looked by searchers during the search period time. It was around 100 yards away from the apartment complex, and it was in a small bare spot in a dense brush covered with weeds. The path leading to her body was tunneled out area of weeds where it was said that children were known to crawl on their hands and knees.
We now want to talk about the body when she was found. There was no signs of sexual assault on her. There were 7 stab wounds to her neck area, which partially severed the carotid artery, which would lead to a lot of blood loss. We also learned that her hair and clothes were wet, most likely from being outside in the storm. Her body was also infested with insects. She had no defense wounds on her body, but there was no blood surrounding the scene. When we were researching more, we found out that the way that the blood cooled and settled was in a different position than how it would have been with how her body was placed.
So we were talking about earlier with the police dogs, the police dogs went to a neighbor's house, but they never, actually the retired police dogs, they never found the actual body, which leads you to think maybe the body wasn't there when the police dogs were searching as far as what that time frame was. And then also the fact that they mentioned that the blood wasn't, it appeared to be how it cooled and I don't know if congealed's the right word, but we talked about, we actually were at the coroner and they talked about what's called lividity, which is in the body you can see where all the blood settles in a body due to gravity, because obviously it's not pumping anymore. And if she was in a certain spot, you would expect all the blood to be in whichever spot was down on the ground. And if that's not the case, then it does show that possibly she wasn't moved or murdered there, or that maybe she was moved.
Right. And the other thing about the injuries to her is that if the person they had looked at who was a sexual predator would have done something like this, she probably would have seen sexual assault, and they didn't see that in her. And that does kind of point to a younger suspect, but that suspect had to be able to kill her somewhere where they probably wouldn't have made a huge mess and then move her body there. And most kids are not going to do that. So it's kind of a conflicting thing when we talk about the evidence and where she was found.
So she was stabbed how many times?
She was stabbed 15, I think.
In her carotid artery?
And her carotid artery was hit, yes. So
did any mention as far as like how much blood was at the actual scene? Because that would create a lot of blood.
And actually that's why they said when they found her body, there was not enough blood there to have been stabbed in the carotid artery.
So it's pretty, I mean, everybody pretty much agrees that she wasn't killed there. Is that the conventional thought behind this, or is there still some question as far as that?
I think there's some questions about that. I think the resource that we had, who happened to be somewhat close to the case, he seems to think that she was moved there and wasn't stabbed there.
I mean, it looks like most of the evidence kind of leads to that, with the dogs not finding her, the lividity patterns of where the blood was, and then the fact that there's not a lot of blood at the actual scene that would be caused from her getting stabbed that many times. So it kind of raises some questions about that.
Right. Now, one of the other things is that Lydia did a lot of work, and she didn't put it in here because she's a little humble, but she does a lot of work in something we're doing right now in class with the forensic entomology. She found that the autopsy report had collected maggots and said they were in second instar. And she went back and found the temperatures and everything from those days and figured out that her body was outside and probably killed somewhere around 4 o'clock the previous day. And she did all the math and stuff for that, which would also show that most likely she was killed somewhere else, but still outside. And then the body was moved there because they didn't find, the body would have been giving off gases and things like that, and the dogs didn't go through that area prior to that.
So the investigators did not take it through the entomology to figure out what the min and max colonization was and what the possible time frame could it be? They did not do that in their case.
We don't know if they did that. We didn't have that information
So
from
it's
the
not
police
public
department.
record.
Yeah, it's not public record.
Okay.
So we don't know exactly if they did that or not.
Because that's an
So-
important thing, because it can really put a time frame there.
Now we want to talk about potential evidence that could have been found at the scene. First, there was a garbage bag found next to Devan's body. Unfortunately, we do not know very much about it, as during the police investigation, this bag was not collected. A similar thing happened with the partial shoe print also found at the location. We found a mention of a shoe print in the article that we read, but it was also not recorded by the police. These are the only two pieces of evidence that we could even find through our research through articles and court cases.
Now we want to talk about the New Philadelphia Police Department as itself. This was the biggest case that had happened in a long time, quite possibly ever, because people would say that something like this would never happen in this small town. We found in our research that the police chief had many years of experience, and he said that he had only experienced one other murder case before this in his entire career. In order to be able to do an autopsy, they had to use an adjacent county, Stark County, to do the autopsy because they did not have the resources to do so.
So this is something that is a problem in a lot of small towns, and we even talked about it the other day as we went to the coroner's office. Some states are limited on the number of medical examiners have and things like that. In a small town where jurisdictions have a small police force and probably lack of experience, sometimes things get missed, especially in protocol and things like that, especially in a high-profile case of a young child getting killed. So did they make mistakes? Maybe. Is it unusual in cases like that? Probably not. I don't think that we can focus so much on the mistakes that were made, but what can we do now to fix those?
Well, it's kind of like a catch-22 when you live in a town like that, because it's A, there's not a lot of crime that's being committed, but then B, there aren't a lot of people that have the resources to know how to investigate those crimes, and then you start to think about, like, what is the requirement of that? How far out does the police chief and that police department have to go? What is their due diligence? Do they have to reach out to the state and have the state authorities come in, or do they try to handle it themselves? Is there any rules in place? Because probably a lot of it just depends on how much effort the local people want to put into solving it, and that's the human element that's involved also, that goes along with it. And it is just it's a problem with resources, based on where you live in the state or the country.
Now, we just wanted to mention a little bit about Anthony Harris. While our main focus is on Devan, it is still important to know what happened to Anthony. Anthony was the Dunivers' neighbor, as we've said before, and he would often play with the Dunivers outside. He was said to be a kind kid.
When the police decided to bring Anthony in for questioning, they said they were just going to do a voice stress test. He was in an interrogation room with a detective alone at age 12. We don't know why he was alone in this without his mother, but they said they would just do a vocal stress test and that this would be easy and simple process. The police had Mrs. Harris on the other side and was able to see in what was happening. After a multiple-page confession that we were able to read from Anthony Harris, Anthony ultimately confessed to this crime in order to be able to see his mother because they said that he would be able to walk out.
Now, Anthony was arrested a few weeks after Devan's murder, but 2 years later, due to lack of evidence and a coerced confession, Anthony appealed his case and was let out of prison.
Since this, all the media attention has shifted onto Anthony, and our goal is to bring this story back to Devan.
To our knowledge, there has been no other leads that were followed after appealed his case and was let out from prison. The following are people we believe should be talked to or looked into by the police, so hopefully we can bring justice for Devan and closure for her family and the community. We are in no way accusing anyone of murdering Devan, we just believe that they should be talked to.
Our first is Jamie Redmond. This is Lori's ex-boyfriend. He was a drug addict, a convicted felon, and he lived in the Columbus area. In 1997, so a year prior, he kidnapped Devan for 3 days. The police apparently did nothing about this, which is why Lori claims that she did not contact the police until 8 p.m. Since this incident, he was under court order to stay away from Devan. Residents of New Philadelphia had claimed that they had seen Jamie's car in the area on the day of June 27th. The police pulled over his car in Columbus the next day and asked him why he was in New Philadelphia. He said that he was visiting a sick relative, and to our knowledge, they didn't question him any further. There are multiple reports of a mysterious man being seen by searchers when they were looking for Devan. We first found this man from the ABC 2020 episode that came out in May of 2022. He had long, curly, light brown hair and was said to be about 5'6". He was wearing a gray flannel that was buttoned up all the way to his neck and down his arms, which looked out of place for a hot, humid day in the middle of summer. There were reports of this mysterious man being seen 10 minutes by searchers before Devan's body was found.
All right, there's a couple things here that kind of raised some questions for me. Is number one, the ex-boyfriend who kidnapped Devan for 3 days. He's in the area, and it doesn't seem like the police, really do an in-depth investigation of him. That's one. Two is the person in the woods that's dressed in flannels, long clothes, and all that stuff in the middle of July. That doesn't make a lot of sense. And then third, the volunteer paramedic who finds the body in an area that they've already searched. So then the question is, like you mentioned earlier, is why was that person going back to an area they already searched? So that kind of brings up, and maybe since nobody knows who this person was, based on the information that we have, who's to say that all three of them, or at least two of those, aren't the same person? So, those are that's the biggest questions that I have. You talk about the cadaver dogs not finding the body, the police dogs. Then you have a person that's not dressed appropriately for the temperature. Then you have the boyfriend. Then you have the volunteer paramedic. So all those things kind of rolled together really makes it super suspicious.
Right, and one of the things about the boyfriend is that we just did not find any information about what the police did with him. They may have questioned him. They may have.
So he may have had a great alibi.
He may have had a great alibi.
We just don't know.
Right, we just don't know. They didn't communicate with us, so we really don't know.
Did he live in that area?
He lived in Columbus, which was not too far away.
Okay, so it's not unusual for him to have been in that area. It's not like he went way out of his way.
Right, it wasn't that far a drive. I think it was like 18 minutes away or something. So he could drive through there, and he did have some kind of excuse about why he was there.
To me, the most interesting or intriguing, or the one I would look into more would be that volunteer paramedic. Why did they go back to an area that was already searched?
Right, and we actually talked to one of the people that was in the search who said they searched that area, and then said 10 minutes later they go back and find her body there. And one of the things I think that we also have to look at is, why would that person do that? Why would they watch to see where they had searched already and then put the body there? So, one of the resources that we had talked to.
Part of it, I'm sorry, part of it would be, if they knew they already searched there, then they know nobody would be there when they put the body there.
Right.
So.
Right. And were they trying for the body to be found, or were they really trying to hide it, thinking nobody would go back there? So, those are some of the things that are just kind of weird in this case. Especially, one of the things that I had learned before is that a lot of times the person that calls 911 or the person that finds a body usually is also one of the first suspects you look at.
Right.
And who is this volunteer paramedic that found her? Because we don't know who that is, and we haven't been able to find that out from anybody.
Interesting.
This is the most realistic person of interest that we have. We just don't know who this person is. If anyone listening knows any information about this person, please contact the authorities, as any information is helpful.
Now, next is Richard Duniver. At the time of Devan's disappearance, he was in a bar claiming he was too busy to help look. Now, it is important to note that he was paying child support at this time for Devan, and that Devan also had a life insurance policy on her.
One of the things that me and you talked about that wasn't previously mentioned on the podcast, it is interesting that the father was too busy to help look. It kind of raises some suspicion. What it tells us and what the actual details are of that, we don't really know. But the thing that we were talking about earlier, off air, about how the father, you guys found that he was a witness to a case that put a guy in jail for 15 to life for murder, we don't know if it was murder or not, but the possibility that maybe this was some sort of retribution, revenge type thing, and just curious as to if anybody's looked into that aspect of it.
I don't know if the police have looked into it or not. I'm sure they probably checked his background and so forth, but the thing that was really exciting for me about this is how Lydia worked so hard to find this case. She actually looked at court cases from different counties around where Devan disappeared, and just happened to stumble upon this particular case where her father was the key witness to put this guy in jail. And the resource that we had talked to about it also kind of mentioned that maybe this was a crime to show that they could get to him and his family,
Right.
Which is an unfortunate thing for Devan because she was caught in the middle of that. Now, we don't know for sure if that really happened or not, but it is something that needs to be looked at.
Well, it's one of the things that you look at and to say, as far as Lydia, that she went above and beyond and found a lot of information because, cold case is really an exercise in frustration because it's, the waters are muddy, nothing's ever clear, and especially for high school kids, a lot of the public agencies aren't always forthcoming to give information to kids. As far as the cases are concerned, but just the fact that she was able to find all this information on her own is outstanding, number one. And then number two, just to give these kids an understanding of how hard it is to go through these cold cases, because when you think about it, I mean, they're cases that police couldn't even solve when they happened. So to go back and look at it again, and just the fact that we have a group of kids here at Mason High School that are passionate about this type of stuff, and it's a credit to you and to all the kids that are in this cold case class.
Well, and we hope that maybe that little extra thing will maybe turn the case around. Who knows?
Now, as this investigation continues, it's important to look into people that weren't talked to. This could lead to new information and potential new leads that could help bring Devan's case to a close.
If anyone listening to this has any information regarding this place, you can contact the Tuscarawas County Sheriff's Department at either their phone 330-339-7713 or their email sheriff@co.tuscarawas.oh.us. And if you're uncomfortable with contacting the police directly, please contact us at our email, coldcase@masonohioschools.com, our phone number 513-398-5025, or our social medias at MHS Cold Case. We will get that information to the police.
Cold Case MHS, Monsters and Demons is written by the Mason High School Cold Case students. The editing is done by current student Lydia Lisko. The music was written and performed by MHS student Alexa Dahl. The artwork for this podcast was created by our Mason High School Students in Design Studio internship. Thank you for listening to Season 3 of Cold Case MHS. We really appreciate all the support you have given us this season. I want to thank the students for all their hard work bringing light to those cases that have fallen into the dark. Tune in to Season 4, coming soon.
Believe me, it won't happen again. All those things that you said weren't true. You told me that we'd always be friends, but then what you did next didn't prove it. You said you had my back, but instead you attacked. You got me out of my head. It won't go unsolved this time. We'll catch you and your crimes will be shining the light on you. On you. I saw you acting innocent then, but you didn't expect what came next. You lost your freedom right there. We will make them aware it was you who said. You said you had my back, but instead you attacked. You got me out of my head. It won't go unsolved this time. We'll catch you and your crimes will be shining the light on you. You. lost it way before that. You said you had my back, but instead you attacked. You got me out of my head. It won't go unsolved this time. We'll catch you and your crimes will be shot.